My name is Kara H. Marino, and I am 28 years old. Last Tuesday, at exactly 2:00 p.m., my life split cleanly down the middle. Before that moment, everything felt ordinary in the way routines trick you into believing they're permanent. I was at work, half listening to a meeting, mentally planning dinner, when my phone started vibrating nonstop. When I finally looked down and saw my mom's name, I knew something was wrong before I even answered. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. My dad had collapsed at work. Massive heart attack. Ambulance. Surgery. The kind of words that don't register all at once, just hit in pieces and leave you shaking. My dad is 61. He runs every morning. Eats better than anyone I know. The type who makes you feel lazy for sleeping past 7. So hearing that his heart had failed him felt impossible, like reality had glitched. I didn't shut down my computer properly. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I grabbed my keys and ran. On the drive to the hospital, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over once just to breathe. Instinctively, I called my boyfriend. We'd been together 2.5 years. Long enough that I thought, stupidly as it turns out, that this was exactly the moment where you don't have to ask for support. You just receive it. I told him everything in one breath, my voice breaking as I said my dad was being rushed into surgery and I was heading to the hospital. I asked if he could meet me there. I didn't even frame it as a favor. I framed it as a shared emergency. There was a pause on the line. He said he was sorry to hear that and asked if my dad was okay. I told him I didn't know, that I was terrified, that I needed him there. Another pause, longer this time. Then he reminded me he had dinner plans with his college friends that night, plans he'd apparently been looking forward to. He said he hadn't seen these girls in months and asked if my mom and sister could handle things for tonight. He said he'd come by tomorrow. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to explain why a heart attack isn't a scheduling conflict. I just said, okay. That night, I sat in an ICU waiting room for 4 hours while my dad was in surgery. I watched my mom pace the floor like she was wearing a path into the tile. I held my younger sister while she shook silently beside me. When the surgeon finally came out and told us my dad had made it through, my mom collapsed into my arms and cried like I'd never heard her cry before. I felt hollow, like my body was operating on instinct alone. At 11:00 p.m., my boyfriend texted me. How's your dad? Hope everything's okay. Dinner was amazing, babe. We went to that new Italian place. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't respond. I couldn't find words that didn't sound like begging. The next day, Wednesday, my dad was stable but critical. I took the day off work and stayed at the hospital. Around noon, I texted my boyfriend to let him know my dad had made it through surgery but was still in serious condition. His response came quickly. That's good. Glad he's okay. Want to do something tonight? I feel like we haven't hung out in forever. Read that again. My father was in critical condition, and he wanted to do something because he felt neglected. I told him I'd probably be at the hospital late and suggested that if he wanted to see me, he could come sit with me for a bit. He said he didn't want to sit in a waiting room all evening and asked if I could at least take a break for dinner. I told him my dad might die and I wasn't leaving. You're being kind of dramatic, he said. The doctor said he made it through surgery. He's probably fine. Something inside me went quiet. Thursday, my dad was moved out of ICU. Still serious, but improving. I finally felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. That night, I called my boyfriend and asked if he could come over. I didn't want a big talk. I just didn't want to be alone. He said he'd promised his roommate he'd help her paint her bedroom and asked if I could reschedule. When I told him I'd had a really rough few days, he sighed and said she'd already bought paint and supplies, like $60 worth. Then he said it. Honestly, you've been really intense lately. I get that your dad is sick, but you're being kind of clingy and needy. Every day it's come to the hospital or come over, or can we talk? I need space to do my own things. I'm not your therapist. Clingy, needy. For wanting my boyfriend to show up during the worst week of my life. Something in me clicked off like a switch. You're right, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. I'm sorry, I'll give you space. He sounded relieved. He thanked me. He said he just needed me to understand he had his own life too. I understand completely, I replied. Have fun painting. I hung up and felt absolutely nothing. That night, after I hung up, I sat on my couch with the lights off and let the silence stretch until it felt almost physical. It wasn't sadness in the way I'd expected. It was clarity. I thought about every moment over the last 2.5 years where I had shown up without being asked, without conditions. When his grandmother died, I drove 4 hours to attend the funeral, took unpaid time off work, stood beside him while he cried into my shoulder. When he got laid off last year, I paid his portion of the rent for 2 months and never once made him feel like a burden. When he had a pregnancy scare with a previous girlfriend that resurfaced emotionally for him, I held his hand through multiple tests and told him we would figure it out together. I had never once called him needy for needing me. I had never told him his pain was inconvenient. And when my father almost died, he needed space. By Friday morning, the decision felt less like a reaction and more like a conclusion I'd been avoiding. I didn't want another conversation where I explained my feelings only to have them minimized. I didn't want apologies that came after the damage was done. I didn't want to negotiate for basic presence. So I sent one text, short and final. I told him I'd thought about what he said, that he was right about needing space, and that I was going to give him all the space he needed. Permanently. I told him I didn't think we should see each other anymore. Then I blocked his number. I know that sounds cold. I know people expect a dramatic breakup conversation, tears, closure, explanations. But here's the thing. He had already explained himself when it mattered. He had already chosen where I ranked. Blocking him wasn't punishment. It was protection. The fallout started within hours. He tried to reach me through every channel he could think of. New numbers, email, Instagram messages from accounts I hadn't blocked yet. Then his best friend texted me, furious, demanding to know what I'd done to him and why he was hysterical. I replied once. I told her I'd given him exactly what he asked for, space. Then I blocked her too. 5 days passed, and life shifted into something quieter. My dad was doing better. He was out of the hospital, home resting, already complaining about the low-sodium diet like it was a personal attack. My mom hovered over him constantly, which he pretended to hate but secretly loved. I spent my evenings at their house, helping out, cooking, sitting with him while he told the same stories he'd told my whole life, just happy to still be here to tell them. Being present with my family felt grounding in a way nothing else had. I thought the drama was over. Saturday night, 2 days after I sent the breakup text, there was a knock on my apartment door at 9 p.m. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. He stood there like nothing had happened, hands in his pockets, expression set in that familiar mix of annoyance and entitlement. He said we needed to talk. I told him we didn't. He said I couldn't just end a 2.5-year relationship over text. I reminded him that he'd called me clingy and needy for wanting support while my father was in critical condition. I told him I could end a relationship however I wanted. He tried to rewrite history immediately. He said my dad wasn't dying. He said everything had turned out fine. I told him my father had been in the ICU after emergency bypass surgery and that I hadn't known if he would make it. He said I was taking everything out of context. I asked him what context made calling your partner needy during a family medical emergency acceptable. He didn't have an answer. Then he cried. Not quiet, remorseful tears. Loud, frustrated ones. He said he didn't mean it like that. He said he was stressed, too. He said I didn't understand how hard it was for him when I got so intense about things. I laughed, genuinely, because the audacity of making my father's heart attack about his stress was almost impressive. I told him there was nothing left to work through. He had shown me exactly who he was when I needed him most, and I was choosing to believe him. As I went to close the door, he grabbed my arm and asked about his things. His clothes, his toiletries, his expensive hairdryer. That was the moment any lingering doubt disappeared. My father had been fighting for his life, and his priority was a hairdryer. I told him I'd box everything up, and he could pick it up from the lobby when I wasn't home. He looked offended. He asked if I really wouldn't even let him inside after everything. I told him no. I closed the door. He banged on it for 10 minutes, alternating between crying and threatening to call my landlord for a domestic disturbance. Eventually he left, shouting through the door that I was going to end up alone forever with that attitude. Maybe. But I would be alone with dignity. The next few days felt like a parade of people auditioning to explain his behavior to me, as if enough voices repeating the same excuse might make it true. His friends started first. Messages slid in from numbers I didn't recognize, all variations of the same theme. He didn't mean it like that. He was overwhelmed. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed. You shouldn't throw away something good over one bad week. I read them without replying, because the problem wasn't that he'd said something cruel. The problem was that when everything was on fire, he'd chosen comfort over character. Then his family joined in. His mother called me from an unknown number, her voice tight and controlled, like she was already bracing for resistance. She told me her son was devastated, that he hadn't been eating, that whatever he'd said, she was sure he didn't mean it. She said I needed to forgive him and move on like an adult. I told her, calmly, that her son had called me needy for wanting support during a family medical emergency, and that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a character reveal. She said he was overwhelmed and didn't know how to handle the situation. I told her neither did I, but the difference was I didn't make him feel like a burden for needing me. She hung up without saying goodbye. His brother texted me later that night, a long message about how I was throwing away something meaningful over nothing, how I needed to grow up and work through problems instead of running away. He said his sister-in-law had given me the best years of her life, and I owed her at least a face-to-face breakup. I stared at the screen, stunned by the audacity. I replied once. I told him I'd spent 3 days watching my father fight for his life, while his brother complained about not getting enough attention. I told him I wasn't running away from a problem, I was walking away from a pattern. I asked him what exactly his brother had given me, besides criticism when I needed support most. He responded with a few insults I won't repeat here, followed by a message accusing me of being emotionally manipulative and narcissistic for making a medical emergency about myself. Somehow my father's heart attack had become their family's inconvenience. Through all of this, my ex kept trying to reach me in increasingly creative ways. New email addresses, Instagram DMs from burner accounts, even LinkedIn, which would have been impressive if it wasn't so sad. The messages evolved over time. First it was apologies, then minimization, then anger, then threats. I didn't respond to any of them. Silence was the only boundary he hadn't found a way to bulldoze. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened in my real life. My sister, who had been quietly watching everything unfold, finally spoke up. She told me she'd never liked my ex, but hadn't wanted to say anything because I seemed happy. She said he always found a way to redirect conversations back to himself, even during family dinners, even when the focus should have been elsewhere. Hearing that didn't make me angry. It made me sad, because it meant the signs had been there long before I was ready to see them. The real gut punch came a few days later when I ran into his roommate at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable the moment she saw me, like she'd been carrying something she wasn't sure she should say. She told me she'd heard about the breakup and that she was sorry. I thanked her, genuinely. Then she hesitated and said, "For what it's worth, he never helped me paint that bedroom." I stopped walking. She explained that the night he'd told me he was painting and called me needy, he'd actually gone out with a woman from his office, said he needed a break from me because I was being intense. I thanked her again and walked away, my chest tight but my mind strangely calm. That piece of information didn't break me. It completed the picture. It wasn't just emotional neglect. It was deception layered on top of avoidance, a willingness to lie rather than show up. I didn't confront him about it. There was no point. The relationship was already over. Knowing he'd chosen to be with someone else while my father was in surgery didn't make me angrier. It made me resolute. A week later, his sister reached out. She'd always been the reasonable one in the family, the one who saw things clearly but didn't always speak up. She told me she wasn't calling to defend him. She said what he did was awful, and she wanted me to know that not everyone in their family thought I was the villain. Then she added something quietly devastating. The woman from his office had just gotten back together with her ex-boyfriend. Apparently, she'd never intended anything serious with my ex. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I felt validated. He'd thrown away a relationship where he was loved and supported for something that didn't even want him. After that, the way he moved through the world shifted from desperation to intrusion. He started showing up in places he knew I'd be. My gym, the coffee shop I stopped at every morning on my way to work, the bar where my friends and I watched games on Sundays. The first time, I left without acknowledging him. The second time, I told him directly that if he kept appearing wherever I went, I would consider it harassment. He said he wasn't following me, that he was allowed to exist in public spaces. I pointed out that he'd never stepped foot in my gym before in the 2.5 years we'd been together. He said maybe he was trying new things. I told him to try them somewhere else. The third time was the coffee shop. He walked in after me, ordered a drink, and sat down at my table like we were catching up. He said we needed to talk. I told him I really didn't. He said 2.5 years had to mean something to me. I told him it meant everything, which was exactly why it hurt so much when he couldn't be bothered to show up when I needed him. He said he'd apologized and asked how many times he needed to say sorry. I told him apologies don't change patterns. He asked what pattern I was talking about, so I told him. I reminded him of the time he asked me not to bother him during his spa day when my uncle was in the hospital last year, the time he got annoyed when I texted him about my work promotion because it interrupted his bachelorette weekend plans with friends, the time he made me leave my own birthday dinner early because he had a headache that mysteriously vanished when his friends called with plans. I asked him what context made any of that acceptable. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at the table like the answer might appear if he waited long enough. It didn't. He started crying. People were staring. I stood up and told him to stop showing up where I was, to stop trying to contact me, and to accept that it was over. As I walked away, I could hear him crying behind me, and for a moment guilt flickered. Then I remembered sitting alone in that hospital waiting room, checking my phone every few minutes, hoping he'd changed his mind and decided to come. He never did. The final escalation came from his mother. She called me again, this time from her own number, her tone sharp with accusation. She told me I was torturing her son, that he couldn't eat or sleep, that he was losing weight, that I was destroying him. I told her calmly that I hadn't spoken to her son in weeks, that he was the one following me, and that if she wanted to talk about destruction, we could start with the night my father was in emergency surgery while her son was out with another woman. There was a long silence. Then she said quietly that he hadn't told her that part. I told her I was sure he hadn't. She said she needed to talk to her son and hung up. After that, the appearances stopped. The messages stopped. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. A month later, I'm writing this as a final update because this chapter finally feels closed. My dad is doing well. He started cardiac rehab and already acts like the doctors are being overly cautious. My mom has turned into a low-sodium culinary experimenter, which he pretends to complain about while eating everything she puts in front of him. Last week, he told me he was grateful for the second chance, and that watching how I handled everything made him proud. That meant more to me than any apology ever could. As for my ex, the truth eventually came out in full, and it was worse than I'd realized. His sister reached out again, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she should say anything. She told me the woman from his office, and he hadn't just been spending time together casually. They'd been sleeping together for about 4 months. Not lunches, not friendly drinks, a full physical affair. That Thursday night when I called him from the hospital and he said he was painting and called me needy, he'd spent the night at her place while my father was recovering from heart surgery and I was falling apart. The reason she got back together with her ex-boyfriend made everything sting in a different way. Her ex had found out about the affair and threatened to go to HR about a relationship between employees in the same department. He chose his career over my ex. My ex was never the plan. He was the convenience. I asked his sister why she was telling me all of this. She said her brother was already rewriting the story, telling people I was controlling and that he was the victim, and she didn't think I should have to live with that narrative. I thanked her, but honestly, I didn't care about the narrative anymore. The people who mattered knew the truth. What did hurt was fully realizing that during those first few days after my dad's heart attack, when I was desperate for any kind of support, my ex wasn't just absent. He was actively choosing someone else. I let myself feel that, really feel it, and then I let it go. Betrayal doesn't define you. Your response to it does. The consequences kept coming for him without any effort from me. His work situation became uncomfortable once people connected the timeline. HR didn't fire anyone, but the environment shifted enough that he started looking for a new job. Last I heard, he was still looking. The woman he'd been involved with barely acknowledged his existence after things blew up. According to his sister, he tried to confront her at a company event, and she acted like she didn't know what he was talking about. Multiple witnesses. He left early. He lost most of our mutual friends, not because I told them anything, but because they did the math themselves. They saw my posts from the hospital. They remembered the dates. 2 of his closest college friends actually reached out to apologize to me, saying they'd known something was off about his behavior for years, but hadn't wanted to see it. His roommate moved out, tired of the constant drama and late-night strategy calls about how to get me back. My ex is now alone in a 2-bedroom apartment he can barely afford, scrambling to find a roommate. I heard his mother is pressuring him to move back home. Funny how that works. As for me, I'm doing better than okay. I've been focusing on what matters: my family, my health, my work. I got a raise because I threw myself into projects I'd been putting off. My relationship with my sister is stronger than it's ever been. Am I dating? No, not yet. I'm not ready, and I'm okay with that. Trust doesn't bounce back overnight. But I'm clear now on what I need. I need someone who shows up when it's hard, not just when it's convenient. Someone who doesn't treat my pain as an inconvenience. Someone who chooses me consistently, not conditionally. He texted me one last time from a number I hadn't blocked yet. He said losing me was the worst thing that ever happened to him and that he finally understood what he'd had. I read it, then blocked the number, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. Some doors need to stay closed. If anyone takes anything from this, let it be this. Believe people when they show you who they are, especially when things get hard. Words are easy. Actions tell the truth. I asked for the bare minimum presence during a crisis and got called needy for it. He asked for space, and I gave it to him permanently. Some people don't realize what they have until it's gone. That's not my problem anymore. Take care of yourselves. And if you still can, hug your dads. You never know how much time you've got.